What are the do's and the don'ts of speaking like a leader that people will actually rally behind? Let's reveal 3 do's and 3 don'ts when breaking down Donald Trump's appearance at CNN's town hall a few months ago. And disclaimer, this is not a political endorsement. Try to spot this first clue when he's asked why he should still be president.
You are also under active federal investigation for trying to overturn the 2020 election results. Your first term ended with a deadly riot at the Capitol, and you still have not publicly acknowledged the 2020 election results. Why should Americans put you back in the White House?
Because we did fantastically. We got 12 million more votes than we had in, as you know, in 2016. I actually say we did far better in that election. Got the most that anybody's ever gotten as a sitting president of the United States.
Trump is a master at a rhetorical device that we call antennagoge. This is where you take a negative statement or problem and you turn it into a positive statement or solution. Here he takes the negative that CNN presents and turns it into a narrative around improvement of getting the American vote.
When you've talked about the 2020 election results in the past, you once suggested terminating the Constitution. Do you stand by those comments?
No. I'm not talking about terminating the Constitution. I'm talking about cherishing the Constitution. The Constitution says that we're supposed to have legal and well-maintained and well-looked-at elections, and we didn't have that. I cherish our Constitution, but we have to live up to the Constitution. We weren't living up to the Constitution.
The antennagoge here is from terminating the Constitution to cherishing the Constitution. And that's ultimately my first do here, which is to reframe the point. Now, while you may not face the backlash that Trump regularly does, you need to proactively communicate problems that people can relate to, just like this.
What's wrong with their user interfaces? Well, the problem with them is really sort of in the bottom 40 there. So what do? It doesn't work because the buttons and the controls can't change. They can't change for each application, and they can't change down the road if you think of another great idea you want to add to this product.
When you tee up the problem and the solution, just like how Steve Jobs does here when introducing multi-touch for the iPhone, you're creating stark contrast, which makes your positive statement that much more appealing to your listener, and it makes it easier to change their way of thinking. But here's where it can turn ugly.
What happened during that election, unless you're a very stupid person, you see what happens. A lot of the people in this audience, and maybe a couple that don't, but most people understand what happened. That was a rigged election, and it's a shame that we had to go through it. It's very bad for our country. All over the world, they looked at it, and they saw exactly what everyone else saw.
When you use polarizing extreme words like stupid or rigged, you run into the danger of alienating your audience. While it can draw laughs from people that might support you, don't use negatively charged words, because they'll only serve as a distraction to your audience from being more receptive and understanding your main point. Instead, see what you can take away from watching how Obama handles a heckler.
There is a process that we set up in our democracy. Right now, I'm talking. You'll have a chance to talk sometime soon. We don't have to interrupt each other. It's not a good way to do business. You wouldn't just interrupt people in the middle of a conversation. It's not how we do things.
If you're ever dealing with someone who clearly has an agenda against you, you can recontextualize their point. This is where you point out the absurdity of what people are saying and then you put that in a different context. And this is a prime example of what I call the mirror method, where instead of trying to fight back, you simply reflect the energy right back at them to the point where they realize just how absurd they really were and immediately quiet down. Now, the next thing I'd recommend is to use rhetorical devices. See if you can spot the 3 ways how Trump takes the rigged election topic to a whole different level.
I think it's a shame what happened. I think it's a very sad thing for our country. I think it's a very sad thing, frankly, for the world, because if you look at what's gone to our country has gone to hell. Our borders are bad. Our military has been bad. You look at the taxes, you look at inflation, what's happened to inflation, it's just destroying our country. We've really become, in many ways, a third world country.
Now, there are 3 different rhetorical devices that Trump is using. The first is anaphora. This is the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. When discussing the state of America, he says this.
I think it's a shame that what happened. I think it's a very sad thing for our country. I think it's a very sad thing, frankly, for the world.
The second is what we call anatoplosis. This is where you repeat the last word or phrase of a clause at the beginning of the next phrase or clause. For example, he says this.
If you look at what's gone to our country has gone to hell. You look at inflation, what's happened to inflation, it's just destroying our country.
And the final thing Trump uses is hyperbole. This is where you exaggerate your statements to make an emotional appeal to your audience, which subconsciously distorts their ability to question almost anything that you're saying.
Our country has gone to hell. It's just destroying our country. We've really become, in many ways, a third world country.
Now, when you implement creative wordplay and use hyperbole, you become much more memorable. Particularly with hyperbole, you're suspending your audience's ability to logically reason, and you're transferring your emotion and passion to them. And if you know that what you're about to say is really going to resonate with your audience, using hyperbole is just like the nail in the coffin to make sure that they stand firm with you. But see if you can spot this particular communication problem when Trump talks about the sexual allegation against him.
I have no idea who this woman. This is a fake story, made up story. We had a horrible Clinton-appointed judge. He was horrible. He allowed her to put everything in. He allowed us to put nothing in.
Mr. President,
this is a
you're
fake
recounting your version of
story.
events here right now to the audience.
Here is the under-discussed tip about using hyperbole. Don't use hyperbole related to any point that could be questioned by your audience. For example, Trump's hyperbole about inflation is driven by the fact that the US inflation rate in 2022 was higher than it's ever been in more than 20 years. But when you're using hyperbole in a he said, she said type of matter, that's when your audience can no longer suspend disbelief, and that could make you seem untrustworthy or even manipulative. But something Trump does do to win the crowd over is this.
But when you said you are considering pardoning a large portion of those charged with crimes on January 6th, does that include the 4 Proud Boys members who were charged and convicted of seditious conspiracy?
I don't know. I'd have to look at their case, but I will say in Washington, D.C., you cannot get a fair trial. You cannot. Just like in New York City, you can't get a fair trial either.
And here's one more for good measure.
Many people's bills are up several $100s a month, including mine. If elected president again, what is the first thing you would do to help bring down the cost to make things more affordable?
Drill, baby, drill. You know what that means.
What you should take away here is to answer the question up front. Specifically, use simple language to answer the question and then back up your point. When you use the military communications acronym that we call BLUF, or bottom line up front, it's so much easier for your audience to follow you even if they don't necessarily agree with what you're saying. What I wouldn't recommend is answering a question like this.
But the fact that I was able, I'm so proud of it. We put 3 great justices on the Supreme Court. We have almost 300 federal judges.
But what's right?
But now, for the first time, the people that are pro-life have negotiating capability, because you didn't have it before. They could kill the baby in the 9th month or after the baby was born.
It took CNN's Caitlin Collins at least 4 times before she finally got Trump to say this.
Some people are at 6 weeks. Some people are at 3 weeks, 2 weeks.
Where's President Trump?
President Trump is going to make a determination what he thinks is great for the country and what's fair for the country.
The key here is to not meander with your response. If you can't answer a question because you don't have a clear answer in mind, that's okay. You can say that. The bigger point here, and one that frankly I didn't see Trump do throughout the entire duration of this interview, is he didn't admit to or concede to a mistake that he might have made. As leaders, we all could be better about something, and sharing your mistakes makes you that much more relatable as a leader. When people are against you, regardless of their reasons, if you want to win them over, it oftentimes requires you to concede to anything simply as a disarming tactic, because that way your audience will then be much more likely to listen to you or believe you. And one leader who did this beautifully to eviscerate his opponent in this argument was Elon Musk. Check out exactly what he did right here.